shameless plugs for the Architecture Foundation. So one, Nadine, who's in the audience, runs the golf tournament, has been doing a wonderful job the past 6 months with our social media. We're on all platforms. We made this announcement last year, and since then about all our social media has doubled in our followership. So if you just keep spreading our word, that's how we're trying to get out everything that we're doing over the course of the year as the foundation, with the golf tournament, the archives, our lectures, everything that we kind of promote, we're promoting through those channels. So the bigger we can grow that community, the more people we can reach with our message. Another shameless plug, so as I mentioned before, we have raffle tickets. We're going to do the raffle at the end of the night, so if you haven't got yours, you can sneak out at any point and get them from Diana. There's the sculptures round, and many of the sketches here have been done by Doug Sindor, Ron Peters, and Mark Vinson, who are in the audience and at the panel, so their value increases with them sitting there if you can get it signed before they leave. So, just a little tidbit. As we begin, I'd like to thank all our generous sponsors who support us tonight, and many of them have been supporting us for many years. Our preservation sponsors this year are CCBG Architects, Soul Architects, 180 Degrees Design Build, BWS Architects, and the Peter and Paula Faceas Foundation. At our archive sponsor level, we have Weddell Gilmore Architects, Arcadia, Historic Streetscapes, and the Tempe Preservation Foundation. And then another very special thanks for all of you who have donated at the friendship level this year. Your support goes a long way. And before I get into telling what our kind of support goes to, I'd like to take a moment to recognize somebody that's been absolutely critical over the past year. Elaine Becker, who has been the co-chair for the past year, is actually taking over as the chair of the Archives Committee this summer. She's been invaluable to what she's done. She's done a tremendous job helping Dino Sekeller get Southern Arizona off the ground. She was instrumental in last year's archive event and also this year. So, Elaine, thank you very much. So then, just to know how all these donations, especially the archives cause, have gone to good use. So, last spring we celebrated the remarkable work of Arthur Brown down in Tucson. And thanks to the tireless work of the committee and all the funds we were able to raise, we rekindled a vital relationship with the University of Arizona Special Collections that had gone dormant for almost a decade. And with that, we were able to begin discussions with the University of Arizona about accepting the Arthur Brown collection. Now with the university, they had the full capacity to digitize and the staff hours to do the work, which that accounted to almost like $43,000 worth of man hours and machinery that they have that they were willing to donate. What they lacked was the funding for physical materials. So with last year's donations, we were able to leverage that money. We ended up going out and getting an Arizona Historical Records Advisory Board grant with the help of Doug Sindor, who actually wrote the grant, to supercharge that donation. We were able to purchase materials for the university for acid-free folders and other archive event material to have the longevity of the physical documents. And with that, the University of Arizona accepted the collection, now is in the process of digitizing it so that it is available for public consumption. So it was a huge get by the Southern Arizona Committee and the Archives Committee all together. So a wonderful job and a wonderful example of how the dollars that everybody donates actually goes to work to preserve the architectural legacy of Arizona. And now tonight, we're going to turn our focus to Tempe and Mill Avenue. We have a number of people who have worked tirelessly to preserve Mill Avenue. A few of those are on our panel here, including Bob and Stu and Mark. And then we have Ernie in the audience, who has done his due as well. And Bob and Ernie and Stu all have funneled their collections through the AAF and have been placed at the Heritage Center and also the Tempe History Museum. So another reason why this is a hugely critical thing that we're doing here. To lead tonight's discussion and presentation is Vic Linoff. I first met Vic probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more. I was dipping my toe in how to get involved into civic duty. I started sitting on the Mesa Preservation Board. Vic came up, you know, he was the kindest person. He was always present in those meetings, always willing to have a discussion and share his knowledge. And if anybody has ever attended a preservation board meeting in the East Valley, you probably have a similar story about Vic, because he is a constant at all those. Vic is an author. He's been a property owner for historic properties. He's an active member of numerous foundations and organizations, including the Arizona Preservation Foundation, the Mesa and Tempe Preservation Foundations, the Mesa and Tempe Historical Societies, and that's just to name a few. Most importantly though, Vic is one of the strongest and most passionate voices in preservation in the Valley. And it's my pleasure to welcome Vic to the podium.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What did we decide on?
Berkeley was cheap.
Oh. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm really a nothing. I'm not an architect, but I am a critic. And I see good architecture when I see it. And otherwise, and I'm also a fan of design, but I don't have any design experience. But I know good design when I see it. Doesn't always go with everybody else's design, but nonetheless. All right, we've got to move over to in the meantime, go ahead and smoke them if you got them. See, you moved everything around, and now there it is. Okay. How about it? All right, we've got it. Thank you. So I was, and I don't know why I was asked. I think that had something to do with Ron Peters, and if anybody knows Ron, too bad. You know exactly what I mean. But I was asked to do a brief presentation on the subject of Mill Avenue and how it has evolved over the years. And I think what makes Tempe's growth and change over a relatively short period of time so fascinating is that it forms an ideal case study and model in a very compact place, in a very compact form, of how a community can transform over time from really what was a rural village to an urban powerhouse that it is today, all under 40 square miles. Like all other valley cities and communities, Tempe's central commercial district grew as the town emerged. A side note, until the opening of the Mill Avenue Bridge, I don't know how many know this, in 1933, Mill Avenue really was a dead-end street. Now it's the main through course of Tempe, but all the traffic crossed the river at Ash Avenue. That was the old bridge that got demolished for Town Lake, except for one of the approaches. Tempe was really an early leader in architectural design. James Creighton designed the 1898 four-story Tempe Hardware Building, which I think at the time was one of the tallest buildings in the valley. It's, what, 3 stories, but it's really 4 stories, isn't it, Stu? 3. I'm not an architect. Can I say that? It looks like a 4-story building because it's got this big, tall ballroom. Sorry about that. In the back. Okay, I stand corrected. Leighton Green Knight created the Egyptian revival style, which was really novel in the valley at the time for the Tempe National Bank in 1912. And later came the Valley Bank. Valley Bank led the region in branch offices and unique architectural designs. This one was incorporating the Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome in 1962. And it really was, anybody with ASU, architects with ASU, I know there was a lot of interest and effort to try to save this, but the new president of ASU didn't seem to appreciate it that much, and it was taken down, and yet the Honors College was set back behind it. And the reality is it could still be standing today. There was enough public pressure that the dome be saved, and I'm not sure really why. It is moved across the street to a student residential complex called Vista del Sol, and it is now a ramada at the back of the property. So it really has no relationship to how it looked originally. The first hint of major Mill Avenue changes came in 1956 when the town's first urban shopping center was built right on the edge of the urban downtown at University and Mill. And I think that might be a unique situation in the country. When strip centers were coming along, they weren't usually built right on the edge of the traditional business district. Nationally recognized architect Victor Gruen was selected to design the 118,000 square foot strip center. And Gruen, you may recall, is best known as the designer of the first all-enclosed mall. Anyone know which one that is? Southdale and Minneapolis are actually in Edina, which he had designed, and it opened the same year as Tempe Center. So really quite a contrast in the two. And then there was the 1961 Alpha Drive Fraternity Row. Leading mid-century architects Ralph Haver, Kemper Goodwin, John Sing Tang, Edward L. Varney, and Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired design were selected in a competitive exercise and were chosen to each build a separate fraternity house. And that was novel in itself. But as things go, and people really were sad to see these demolished in 2012 because within that small property was a very unique history of some of the most well-known and respected mid-century architects. After World War II, as more people left city centers to move to the suburbs, a new term emerged, and that was slum and blight. And removal programs were initiated through the federal government to return life and activities to aging downtown and bring people and businesses back into the traditional business centers. In the 1960s, Scottsdale scored more than $9 million of HUD money to demolish its historic core and build a civic center as part of an urban renewal project. Scottsdale Civic Plaza forever eradicated the historic heart of the city's earliest years, all accomplished with 2/3 of the cost subsidized by the federal government. That didn't go, oops. That was your fault. I just pushed a button. God, am I nervous. It didn't go without notice by other cities. Seeing what Scottsdale was able to do, Tempe initiated a slum and a blight program that would allow it to replace its historic inventory with new and modern buildings, mostly with money from the federal government. I was told by Theron Rust, who, excuse me, was the first redevelopment director in the city, that when completed there would be no old buildings not be issued to replicate them. Tempe was determined to go entirely modern. I think it's time to call out the sympathy card here for two people. I'll introduce Stu in a little bit, but Stu is in his second week of a total knee replacement, and we really. No, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. And we really appreciate him coming out because 2 weeks into a knee replacement is not a very good time, and I'm 5.5 weeks into my knee replacement, and it affects my voice and my throat. Sorry. Unlike most other valley cities that tended to grow organically and was market-driven, landlocked Tempe, fearful that it would lose business to the increasing number, is that alcohol? Vodka. Oh, they're all done, aren't they? I was going to ask for an apple tea. Tempe was concerned that because of its compact size and being landlocked, that it would lose business to the increasing number of regional malls being built in the surrounding cities. So they became determined to make a downtown shopping mecca by building new and attracting chain stores and national businesses in favor of local mom and pops that populated the downtown for so long. One thing that was never taken into consideration is when new buildings replace old ones, mixed rental opportunities are being eliminated, something that exists in traditional older cities. You can be in a Class A office or residential building, or maybe a B next to it or a C, but you're all within the urban mix. But when you start to tear everything down and create a whole new environment, then you've created a whole new floor for rentals that often are unaffordable, particularly by small businesses. And one of the things that I always noticed, most colleges and universities have a college town or a district. I went to the University of Minnesota, and Dinkytown was an old neighborhood next to the university, and that's where a lot of businesses, campus businesses started. If you're going to take a business class, you ought to think about getting into business for yourself. But when all these new buildings came along, there was never an opportunity for a small business to get a foothold and get started. Mill Avenue quickly became one of the highest priced streets of all the valley cities, and it still remains that today, much higher than some of the major strip centers and high-end commercial places. And that contributes to a very high turnover of businesses on Mill Avenue. When the new Tempe City Hall, designed by Kemper and Michael Goodwin, debuted for the city's centennial in 1971 at the expense of the loss of the 1914 City Hall, which really would have been a wonderful building to say. It set a new standard for downtown architecture and was foretelling the real desire, even though there was sometimes an expressed interest in keeping historic properties, nonetheless, they were generally replaced by much more modern ones. One by one, historic buildings were demolished in favor of new, modern-looking designs for Mill Avenue. An entire block was demolished for the first time for the Mission Palms Hotel in the mid-1980s. When it opened in '85, Tempe's Mission Palms was the first modern, full-service hotel in the downtown. It was built on more than a block that once had housed about a dozen individual businesses. But it went through 3 bankruptcies until finally acquired during a recession by the Resolution Trust Corporation in the early 1990s, which begs the question, was it too ambitious at the time that it was built? Massive projects such as the 1924 25-acre Center Point development, originally called University Plaza, were proposed that in one clean sweep would eradicate 1/4 of Tempe's original city center. And it started as a proposal for a 24-story building, which would have been the tallest in the city. And that proved really too much for those who wanted to keep the historic character of Mill Avenue. Some of the most divisive council meetings in city history were held during this period. And now it's looking back nostalgically, because I was part of that. We didn't have social media. We didn't have YouTube, where, you know, I could say, go to YouTube and you can hear that meeting when the mayor was called Mayor Hitler, when he wanted to stop all of the negative comments. Someone cried out from the audience, "You're not Hitler, and this isn't World War II," and that got pretty dramatic. Oh hell, we got AI. I'll put it up on YouTube and you'll be able to watch it next week. There you go. And I'm sorry for that last picture. It's the only one I could find that showed the model of the of that 24-story building, which would replace Rundle's at the corner of University and Mill. By the 1980s, downtown redevelopment was in full swing. Thoughts were turning to density in 1985 when local architect and our panelist Siefer designed University Towers at 4th and 5th, Forest and 5th Street. 8-story mid-rise, was that right, Stu? 8?
We called it a high-rise back then.
Yeah. A little bit shorter than 24-story, which was a skyrise. And that was the tallest building for many years in Tempe. And Stu was also the brains on the other side of the coin of the eclectic Bandersnatch Pub and later Old Town Square, which saved several historic properties that would have otherwise been lost. Anyone ever go to Bandersnatch?
Oh, yeah.
Never mind.
This is fine.
Another chunk of historic downtown was replaced by Hayden Square in 1986. The city was kind of hell-bent on the super block developments, and Hayden Square was one of them. Today, high-rises have proliferated, and they really dominate the skyline and overwhelm the few historic buildings that are left. Throughout the years, 2 Mill Avenue constants, though, have been the Flour Mill and La Casa Vieja, the oldest continually occupied adobe structure in the valley. A few years ago, it was restored back to its appearance in 1924 and then repurposed. The mill's future, on the other hand, is still undetermined. There have been so many proposals of what to do with it. We thought we were close on one, but that seems to have died out, so it'll be there forever. It's stronger than a pyramid. It once was a bomb shelter during the 1950s. It can't be torn down. It'll be blown up if it ever is just, the decision is made to disappear. Redevelopment is not just about new architecture and design. Buildings are about their inhabitants, but one of the problems that redevelopment brought to downtown is a loss of long-running businesses, priced out because of new construction. Probably the best example, and I'm sure everyone has patronized changing hands over the years. They were literally forced out of downtown, and that may have been a good thing for them because they are bigger than ever with 2 stores. Tempe had many other businesses. Chewy's, changing hands, as I said, Long Wong's, Bandersnatch, Rundle's Market, Monty's, La Casa Vieja, Earth and Joy, House of Tricks, General Strength Co-op. There were at one time about 7 antique stores in downtown Tempe, and about the same number of vintage and used bookstores. A question that has arisen as to who was the first to react to Tempe's initial plans for downtown redevelopment. It was local architect Bernie Nichols and Bob Hershberger, who you've met earlier, and they were the first to start the downtown preservation movement. And that, I think, is probably a good place for us to move on to a discussion. And I encourage anyone that has some questions to, not why I was asked to do this tonight, but really relevant questions to Tempe history, please let us know. So we put together a really interesting panel, I think, and representing a cross-section of what experiences they've had since almost the very beginning. I came to Tempe in 1973, and I hadn't realized that people like Ernie and Bob were already fighting a battle that predated that. And hopefully you all saw his presentation, and that laid the foundation. But I'm happy to have here tonight, and I'm sure you know both of them, Mark Vinson, a registered architect, certified planner, holds bachelor's and master's degrees in architecture from Arizona State University, a fellow in the American Institute of Architects, and a recipient of the Arizona Architects Medal, Governor's Award, Historic Preservation, Arizona Preservation Foundation, President's Award, and yada, yada, yada. And also for many years, Mark was the city's architect. Yeah, thank you. Just give that to Brandon. Was the city's architect, and he was the first historic preservation officer, and now he's just historic and trying to preserve. He co-authored the award-winning Arizona Highways book, Landmark Buildings, Arizona's Architectural Heritage, and has published a book called Antico 2, and he's not going to explain what that title is, and I'm not either. You have to get the book, even though it's out of print. And I believe the Arizona Architectural Foundation funded that?
That's true.
Yes. Very generously, 34 copies. Might want to consider it because it's a good book. And then he did a book on mid-century architecture of Greater Phoenix and the East Valley. And he's a native of Arizona's historic Clifton and Morenci mining district, and has presented to local, state, and national organizations on Arizona history and architecture. We wouldn't invite anybody that wasn't qualified to come up here, but yet I'm supposed to read all of this. Well, and then we've got the old guy there with the walker. But first, he deserves a round of applause for making it here tonight. I can tell you, I'm only, let's see, you're 2 weeks?
Yeah, but you didn't take as many drugs as I did.
Anybody need Oxy? I've got a whole bottle of Oxy at the,
Recently,
it isn't fun. And you live day to day because you really don't know how you're going to feel one day to the next. So I'm thrilled that Stu came here today. And he's a guy that's done an awful lot. He was born and raised in Detroit, but we don't hold that against him. He moved to Tempe in 1970 and graduated from the College of Architecture at ASU, and that explains a lot. He opened his architectural office, Siefer and Associates, in downtown Tempe in 1973. By the time he retired in 2006 to dedicate his life to music, His firm was responsible for the design of more than 300 projects, most of which were located in downtown Tempe and included University Towers, as we say, Tempe's first high-rise, Tempe Town Center, the Bandersnatch, Fiesta Bowl headquarters, and Old Town Square. Over the decades, he's become a leading advocate for historic preservation, and many of his projects as both architect and developer have involved the preservation and rehabilitation of historic buildings, including the Tempe Hardware Building, which he is now the slumlord, the Vienna, I'm sorry, he owns the, I'm sorry, Steve. The Vienna Bakery Building, the Tempe National Bank Building, and Old Town Square. His contributions to the community are pretty vast. He's past president of the Tempe Chamber of Commerce, and you see where that has gone in the intervening years. The Rio Salado chapter of the American Institute of Architects, a founding member of the Downtown Tempe Community Incorporated, now the DTA, not the DTA, is it? Yeah, Downtown Tempe Authority, and past member of the Downtown Tempe Project Area Committee, and the Tempe Historic Preservation Commission, the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, and the Arizona Jewish Historical Society. I graduated high school. I was diagnosed as a young man as not being very bright. They told me my ignorance was only surpassed by my stupidity, and there just wasn't much there. All right, so to begin this discussion, and I want everybody on the panel to just jump in when you want. You'll need to use the one generous microphone that you'll have to share. A dilemma is approaching for the preservation community that has long mourned the loss of Tempe's earliest structures. Since the redevelopment movement began in full force in the 1970s, some of the buildings that replaced the oldest structures are now reaching the 50-year threshold for consideration as historic properties. Thoughts on that?
Well, that takes us to, what, 1976?
Yep.
Anybody here design a building in 1976 or before? Come on now. So, something to think about. And by the way, I'm just here so I don't get fined. Also, so I can hand the microphone to these esteemed gentlemen.
What's the question again?
What is the question again? Really? The question is that the discussion about Tempe's past and preserving it goes back to the earliest days of Ernie Nichols and Bob Hershberger. And we know that there wasn't a lot of success in saving the buildings. At one time, Mill Avenue was pretty much intact from First Street to University Drive. One by one, they've gone. But what's happened, the major impetus for preservation began in the 1970s, and some of these new buildings are now approaching or are at the age of 50 years. So how do you manage trying to save what's left and then deal with buildings that are now considered eligible for consideration as historic?
Well, Theron Rust, I guess, he never said this to me, but you say that he predicted that all of the old buildings would be gone. But the Casa Loma is there. I think it's going to be there for quite a while. It's got a really nice restaurant in it that when I ever go to the new arts center down on the lake, I usually eat there. And it seems to be fairly successful. Looks like the Laird Drug is going to be around for a while. It's been incorporated into the, what is University Inn now. I remember it more as the Hooters area. There seems to be several other buildings that have maintained their capabilities there. And the nice thing that I think we can credit Ernie for standards in terms of cornice heights and awnings and things like that. And then, of course, the kind of landscape that was really restored, not originating with our plans. So I think there's a lot there. It's going to be there for a long time, just like in Philadelphia. I don't support Theron Russ' prediction. As long as the old buildings have integrity, I think they'll be there. And you can have those great big, ugly eyesore skyscrapers back behind them. It's okay. That's what we thought might happen, and it happened.
Well, would you say, though, that the buildings that have been either saved, repurposed, or that are still there is a result of city planning or the strong advocacy from the preservation community?
Well, I'm going to answer that with a different point. I see the glass half full, and I can't tell you how pleased I am that the city has hired a consultant to come up with a concept to retain the historic core of the downtown. I never thought that would happen. I mean, we fought for that idea for so many years, and that process is ongoing right now. And yes, it's sad that we lost most of the historic inventory from Tempe Town Lake up to about 3rd Street and then from 6th Street down. But between 3rd and 6th, that's where most of the historic inventory is today. And I think the city wisely is moving forward with a plan to save those buildings. After all, the historic buildings was the golden goose that made Mill Avenue the success that it had been all the way from the late 70s right up till really the recession, 2006, 2008, when things kind of did a turnaround. It did a pivot, and now it's an entirely different environment now with all the high-rises that have come in. Yeah, I see that there is a future for the historic buildings.
Again, let me ask you then your thoughts. Was this something that, or in Mark can chime in too, do you think this was something that has resulted from the pressure, the strong pressure put on by the preservation community, or this was part of the city's plan from the very beginning?
Well, you know, historic preservationists they kind of lateral the ball from one to another, and it's usually a small group. I was inspired by Susan Harder, we remember, who was an activist back in the 70s, and Beth Hoffman was another one. They used to show up, and Ernie, for sure. They showed up and raised hell at city council meetings about historic preservation. And that was, you couldn't overstate the importance of a small group of highly motivated people to put pressure on the city council. But, you know, back in the day, you showed the picture of when the Centerpoint project had that enormously large 12-story building.
24.
It was going to be 24.
24.
And the model was out there in the public, and somebody snuck in and put a King Kong model on top of that. But those were pretty dramatic city council meetings back in the day. There was a very activist group of historic preservation people. To be honest, I haven't seen them around that much. I think most of it has been transferred to people like.
I chopped one up. I was a teenager when this started, you know, and I don't count for anything.
No, you don't. No, talk about, you know, individuals. Vic is absolutely been one of the leaders in historic preservation, both in Tempe and Mesa. And Hesmark and Dave Fackler. Many of you probably know Dave. Well, I'd say maybe if Dave wasn't there and the city didn't hire him as the redevelopment director, it'd be an entirely different situation. Of course, he was also the cheerleader for redevelopment in new large buildings at the same time, but he was passionate about keeping the historic projects there, as has Mark, for sure.
I think it'd be interesting, Mark, to hear your perspective, because all of us are outsiders. You worked inside and for the city, and I think you've got your fingerprints on more buildings as the city's architect, having influence on so much that happened in the city, both in new construction and in preservation, and then the preservation officer. How do you look at this whole scenario?
Well, I sort of saw myself as Dave Fackler's conscience. I tried to impress the importance of preservation, and he was willing. He, his charge was to get in there and make things happen, which he was very good at. So I just tried to do my part from within to kind of have an influence or provide a little direction on some of those things, and relying on the guidelines and the efforts that people like those here today have had already established. So maybe I was just sort of in the right place at the right time. But to also tag on to Stu's comments about the importance of political pressure, lobbying, whatever you want to call it. This goes back maybe before any of us were in Tempe, but this is my understanding of the story of how Tempe Municipal Building, Michael Goodwin hated the term Tempe City Hall. He said it should be the Tempe Municipal Building because I don't like the idea of people saying that you can't fight City Hall. But the reason it was located in downtown, and unfortunately it did take out the 1914 City Hall, there should have been some way to avoid that. But the idea that it stayed in the downtown and became whatever you want to call it, a beacon for downtown redevelopment goes back to 1968, and the city had acquired property at Southern and Rural, which is where the library is now, the History Museum, which was originally the library by T.S. Montgomery. And there was a lot of sentiment that that's where the new City Hall should go. Obviously, the city functions had tremendously outgrown the 1914 building, and so there was a lot of public sentiment that the city should move out of the downtown and just tear it down or just let it decay and forget about it. And Rural and Southern was going to be the geographic center of Tempe anyway, but not everybody agreed with that, and apparently it came down to a vote of the city council, and the kind of the preliminary thought was that it was pretty much split. That it was going to be it was split 3 and 3. 3 council people were in favor of moving it. 3 were in favor of rebuilding it downtown. And Jean Sella, she and her husband owned the Sella Sporting Goods, intensely lobbied the one uncommitted council member, and I believe his name was Joe Dwight. And so literally the little old lady in tennis shoes, because of her relentless lobbying, like the proverbial widow trying to obtain justice in the biblical parable, stayed on it and finally got him to swing his vote to voting in favor of keeping it in the downtown. So that was the first actual step by the city government indicating that, okay, we are going to do something in the downtown. We don't know what yet, but we're not going to abandon it.
Were you going to say something, Stu?
Yeah, I wanted to draw attention to what I think was a real watershed moment in downtown, and that was when the city put the RFP out in, I'd say 1978, for the historic block between 4th and 5th Street on the east side, the Andre Building and Golden Temple and the Chipman Peterson Building. The RFP went out, 2 developers came back, Scott Jackson and John Benton, who wanted to tear the building down. The mayor, Lopiano, wanted to tear them all down. And you guys might remember Circus, Frank McGuire and Ken Butterman, a couple of hippies, long-haired guys like I was back in those days too, said, no, we want to save the buildings. So Frank and Ken hired my firm to do the plans to save that block. So it didn't look very good because the building safety department said that these buildings did not meet the earthquake code of Tempe, which is, you all know is Zone 2, which requires structural reinforcement. So we hired Jim McCausland, who did the plan that Bob was referring to of incorporating steel reinforcement inside the brick and cinching it back with number 9 wires and tying it into a structural steel frame on the inside. Anyhow, we had that all lined up, but the city was still, the vote would have been really close whether to go one way or the other. And Shireen Lerner was the historic preservation officer of the state of Arizona at the time, and showed up at the hearing with a piece of paper. The city of Tempe was using block grant funds for all the redevelopment back then. And Shireen said, there is a clause in the block grant agreement that said that every possible effort must be taken to preserve any historic buildings, and kind of shook it right into Lopiano's face. And because of that legality, they were obligated to move forward with the historic approach to saving those buildings. The irony is that Frank and Kent never could raise enough money to do it, and the funny thing was John Benton, who was going to tear them all down, ended up developing that block because the city 1978 Tax Reform Act offered tax credits, 25% tax credits for preserving historic buildings. So that was really the moment, I think, that set the pattern to continue with a mix of the historic and new buildings in the downtown.
While we're on that, I was going to ask something else, but I think it's an interesting story, particularly since you referred to the use of structural steel to tie the Andre building together, which was a little bit earlier than the Tempe hardware building. But you had a unique experience with the hardware building that I think you might want to dredge up from your nightmares and explain that a little bit, because that building almost went away.
Well, these buildings are all unreinforced brick masonry, and the hardware building had 3 wides of brick on the first floor, and then it went to 2. So at the time, there was a beauty salon in the ballroom space, and so we had a cell site on the top roof, and the city required, there's air conditioning units, and the city required that we screen them with these panels. So the contractor stacked a bunch of these panel screens that were plastic sandwich panels all in one place on the roof. And so one day I was walking through the salon out to go out the back door, and I looked up and I noticed the ceiling was cracked. In fact, it was cracked all over, like spider lines all over the place. And we sent somebody up there to crawl in the attic, and those piled up panels had caused one of the trusses to crack, and then it dominoed down, and almost every single truss in the roof had cracked. And I thought it was all over. So it was Verizon was the contractor put those in. And because I had handwritten in the side of my agreement with Verizon that any weight that was a result of that, they had to be approved by a structural engineer, and that they took responsibility for any structural changes. They paid for the cost of completely replacing the roof of the building. We had to get rid of our tenants for like 4 to 5 months, and they had huge cranes bring in, take out the old trusses, bring in the new. The walls started bowing, and they had a technique for bringing the masonry walls back in. Yeah.
And how many contractors did you have to go through to find that would do that work?
Oh, yeah, we had to look all over to find, that was very technical work. They cinched it back like a millimeter a day over a period of 4 or 5 months, and they pulled the bowing, unreinforced masonry walls back. And I just looked at it a few weeks ago, and it's still pretty straight over there, thank goodness.
Well, and it was banded like you find in shipping crates, and people that weren't familiar with Tempe thought that FedEx or UPS had delivered a building, and because it had bands all the way around it. It was quite a tenuous period, but the fact that it's saved and it's stronger today than ever before is.
Thanks for bringing up the most traumatic moment of my life.
Well, we're here to, this is like a family. Everybody knows each other. So I could go around and probably ask everybody about a nightmare experience. It's easy to understand why Tempe, which really was a unique city in the valley, and the fact that it was landlocked. At one time, they tried to expand south to Chandler. That didn't work. And Tempe has the smallest land area of any city. And there were a lot of, in the 60s, 70s, 80s is when the malls were starting to be built and drawing huge amounts of people. And they, that caused a lot of concern for the city. And I think it put them in a direction that not a lot of cities follow. A good city will put down some very strong standards for buildings and occupancy, but Tempe seemed to want to determine what would be in the best interests of the downtown. And that went through a period where they encouraged chains to come in. And of course, there was a number of new buildings and only the chains could afford it. But you had Abercrombie and Fitch, you had McDonald's, which is failed in downtown Tempe because they didn't understand an urban environment. And they said, well, we never had a drive-through, so how could we be successful? And a whole bunch of chains. Borders was down there, and they all failed. So I think the question is, was the city going in the right direction of kind of dictating the terms, or not taking the approach that other cities did? Set a standard, but let things grow organically. I'm not going to repeat it.
Tempe historically has, is this right now?
Yeah, hold it close. You have to hold it very close.
I'd say historically Tempe has been developer driven, and I don't think the
Still hold it close.
there are other places where cities play a much more active role in determining the types of tenants and to try to keep chains out and to dictate. Tempe, I think, managed a pretty good balance. But really, it's all in all, I'd say it's primarily developer driven rather than city planning driven. And that, I think, is what was the cause of a lot of these changes to come in. And they failed. They failed because they didn't understand the vibe of Mill Avenue, right? And because our clientele were people who were really into Changing Hands Bookstore and Cookies from Home and wax thread, all those old businesses.
And the irony is that that experiment really was unsuccessful, and now Mill Avenue today is primarily independent mom and pop businesses. Bob?
This is a little unrelated to the downtown Mill Avenue. But Ernie and I worked on a project it was called Hallelujah Lutheran Church, directly across from the music building on Mill Avenue. We were the third architects interviewed for this job. The first architect had, prior to that time, done all of the Missouri Synod Lutheran churches, I think, in the city. And this was a little bungalow that was on Mill Avenue that teenage kids, pretty much, going to the college, had as a church home, you might say. And apparently they had this architect in, and they asked him what he would do. And there was a parking lot on the north side, and the bungalow on the south side. And he said, well, it's obvious. You put your new building on the parking lot, and you tear down the bungalow. And they wouldn't hire him. They got another architect in. I don't know the name of the other architect, but they asked him what he would do, and he said the same thing. I had a neighbor girl, who actually lived next door to me, who knew that Ernie and I did churches, and she said, why don't you interview him, Hershberger? And so I got in there. This was 2 weeks before the end of school, and they asked me what I would do. I said, I have no idea what I would do. I haven't talked to you about what you'd like. And they said, well, yeah, but in your heart of hearts, I think that was a quote, what would you do? And I said, I don't know what I would do until I really talk to you about what you want. But I said, I know what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't tear down the old bungalow. It's a really fine piece of historic architecture. They said, you're hired. And they didn't ask me my fee or anything. You know, it was kind of incredible. And then they told me the ringer, which was kind of fun. They said, and you have to have it designed within 2 weeks, because we've fiddled around on this for so long, trying to hire an architect, that our funding won't be there unless it's 2 weeks. This was just before finals, just before final projects were in at the school. And I said, okay. I said, if that's what you've got to have, next Saturday, you and I, and this was about half a dozen teenage kids and the minister, we're going to program what you want on this project. And I said, I'm not doing anything during the week because I'm on juries all week long and I'm grading finals. And I said, so then the next weekend, you and me, we're going to design it. And we did. And I said, I'll draw it up the week. And this was right after finals, so it'll be done by your deadline. And we did it, and I got Ernie in to do the landscaping on it. And we won a design award for the design of a bunch of teenage kids and me.
There you go. Mark, you were on the inside. You're a city employee, and you were on the inside during all of this tumultuous period of transition from, although some of the projects were quite large in land area, they hadn't yet graduated to really tall buildings. What was it like on the inside? And your own personal feelings about preservation and that sort of thing, where were you in all of this?
I was trying to lay low. No, actually. Again, I tried to be an influence within the city structure. I was not personally part of the design review staff, but tried to have an influence on them, get them to see the importance of relationships to historic structures and so forth, and again, just try to be that kind of that agent for respect of the historic landscape. Used a lot of Bob and Ernie's work from the PAR 3 study to develop guidelines which are only as effective as the city government wishes them to be. So we can create all the guidelines we want to in-house, and unless the council adopts them, then they don't really do too much good. So you've got to have that political support and will. And even if they adopt them, after the next election cycle, there may be a different composition of the council that decides we don't want to follow those guidelines. So again, the battle is never won. It's an ongoing effort.
Well, go ahead, Stu.
I want to say something about Mark. When Mark was the city architect, Tempe was extremely unique in having somebody who could fix broken design. If somebody's rejected at the design review board level or at the staff level, what normally happens in almost every city is you go back to the architect and start over again, bam, 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 review. We send them to Mark with his beautiful hand. He's one of the most amazing renderers there are in town. He would, in a day or two, fix the design, send it back, and the project would keep moving. And it would look 100% better than it did. So, it's interesting. I don't think that phenomenon really takes place in any other city. Usually it's all bureaucratic, but Tempe has really been improved greatly by his presence.
And Mark is quite humble, but actually, I have to be perfectly honest, I've never liked him. Really. I've sat, I don't know how many meetings that go on for hours and hours, and Mark has an attention span of about 2 minutes, and then he has a drawing pad, and I watched him start with just this little minor sketch until at the end of his 2 hours, he's done a Rembrandt drawing with all these fine details, and he would never stop at every meeting. I've had trouble, and I've asked him how to do it. I can't draw straight lines, so I really am not impressed with people that have that kind of talent. I assume there may be some questions, but let me ask, because this group here has been part of the major 20th century and 21st century movement and transition. When everybody came on, Mill Avenue was very much historically intact, and if you go there today, you know what it looks like. So my question is, and that's an old phrase, it is what it is, so we're not going to change that. What do you see for the future of Mill Avenue in downtown Tempe? What is it going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years?
I go wait.
Try to stay with me.
I think it'll be pretty much like right now, on the street itself. Behind the street on both sides, there'll continue to be change and development. But I think there's enough impetus for the preservation of at least the feeling of the street that it's going to be hard for a developer to come in and say, okay, we're going to tear down from 3rd to 6th Street and we're going to put in this big, new, huge development. I think there'd be enough resistance that isn't going to happen. I guess I'm an optimist.
Well, and don't forget, some of the early buildings from the 70s might be historic, or will be, at least from an age standpoint. Mark?
I think Bob is correct that the, through the efforts of tonight that standard has pretty well been established now. That I don't think we're going back to the days of slum and blight clearance, even though that's technically what HUD still calls it. But that doesn't mean that we can let our guard down, that we don't need to be vigilant, that as citizens or as architects, in responding to the pressures of development on one hand and the historic or existing landscape on the other hand. Did I say enough without actually saying anything?
Well, that's kind of typical, isn't it?
Well, I'd like to think the optimistic scenario is the one that, those buildings will stay there, but
Why that's cutting
urban economics being what it is, there is tremendous development pressure on the part of high-rise developers right now on Mill Avenue to gobble up everything. And the city has to hold the line, because if you left everything up to urban economics and the development community, I wouldn't give the likelihood of the character of Mill Avenue that it is today and has been in the last 40 years, much chance of surviving another 40 or 50 years. Because, we know how it works, that low-rise buildings are not economically viable when high-rise buildings can be built in the same location. So it takes strong effort on the part of those who care about the historic buildings and put pressure on the city, so the city has backup when the next election comes up to hold the line against development that would gladly tear all of it down.
And that election actually is tonight. These three probably have more knowledge and experience through the entire recent history of downtown Tempe. And if you have any questions, they've assured me that they will try to answer them without any billable hours, so that you can avail them of their wonderful knowledge. Does anybody, or have we covered everything?
I'd like to comment on a couple of watershed events and get their reaction, because it was not mentioned how strongly the elected leadership took a look at Mill Avenue and said, we're not a state highway anymore. We used to have 2 lanes north and 2 lanes south. And against the objections of merchants, and probably including you, they narrowed it to 1 lane north and 1 lane south and put in parallel parking. And that took a lot of spine to do that. The other watershed event that I want their comment on, that's a fairly new phenomenon, is to have light rail that's dedicated for the downtown.
Well, you've got the trolley down there, and you're referring with the streetscape. There was a lot of debate, as I recall. It was in the middle of a period where a number of cities closed their main street through the business district and made it a pedestrian mall, which turned out not to be a very good idea. Yuma has gone back to an open street. Minneapolis, Nicollet Avenue is where all the major stores were, and it turned out in the end that the second floor was higher priced real estate than street level because nobody was walking on the street. Any thoughts on that? Did you have something in the back?
I was gonna go take her a mic.
All right, one more after that, so.
I was going to ask, as pertaining to the future of Tempe, as a working artist, voicing architect, voicing your opinion at city halls or working at a firm, what would be your advice to be an activist to preserve Tempe as it is now and Tempe as it was?
now is a good moment to get involved because the Tempe Historic Core Plan is right in the middle of its process, and they're reaching out to focus groups and other people in the community for input. And I can tell you that it is a bit of a battle right now because the development community is unhappy with the restrictions that are currently being proposed in this plan to limit the heights of buildings. Many of them are looking for plans where you can keep the facade of an historic building and then put a high-rise right behind it. So now's a good time. Go to the city planning department and ask. You could actually go online, just Google Tempe Historic Core Plan, and there's still, I think it's still open for public comment.
Thank you. Actually, we've got a little bit more of the program to follow here. So please give a real round of applause and thank you to Bob Hershberger, Mark Vinson, and Steve Siefer, who came with I call him an invalid invalid. He's gone through hell, and for him to come tonight was really a great treat.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vic, Stu, Bob, Mark. Thank you for taking us down memory lane, and you set this, you paved the way for the rest of us to continue the fight. So thank you once again. James, if you would please hand over our appreciation of our speakers tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Round of applause again. And thank you, Ernie and Jeanette, for being here tonight. We really appreciate you. We have sold 3 of the sculptures, Ernie Nichols sculptures tonight, and there are more to be sold, so please stick around, look at them, talk to James. You can figure out the pricing on those with James. But before we leave, I just wanted to say thank you all for being here. We do this for a reason. It's the stories that we tell as architects and, inspiring the next generation to take it on, just like what we are doing here tonight and helping the next generation work towards things that are important to us. Just last year, we reached about $1 million in endowment funds as Arizona Architecture Foundation. And thanks to a lot of you in this room that continue to support the effort. John, Steve, you're here. Where is Tom Riley? He stepped away. But, oh, there you are.
So far away.
James, he's sponsoring a new town prize, travel prize for students. We have Bob Hershberger that continues to support a travel prize for students. And so we've got a lot of support in making sure that our next generation is well taken care of. And you will hear horror stories as of late because you know the funding situation at our universities, it's dwindling as we speak. And it's always important for us to continue to support people, the next generation, in the ways that we can. We've heard stories of students that are literally sleeping in their cars because they don't have a home to go to because of their financial situation. So we want to help our next generation to take on the baton and do the things that we do. And all of this in the past 5 years, we've made a tremendous change where Arizona Architecture Foundation is concerned. We used to be Rio Salado Architecture Foundation, and then we had the Central Arizona Foundation as well. We merged, and now we are the Arizona Architecture Foundation. And it takes good leadership and good support of people like you to make that happen. And I want to call upon 3 special people tonight. Phil Weddle, if you want to step up out here. Rob Wertheimer. And James Freeman. These are our 3 past presidents who literally changed the course of who we are as a foundation and how far we've come. It's not easy to get $1 million in foundation funds to be able to support the next generation and have lectures such as these happen tonight. So
we have something very small for you.
Our own Ernie Nichols?
But thank you all. Thank you for your leadership, your mentorship, and for continuing to work hard towards, putting events on like these and supporting the foundation.
Thank you, Caroline.
All right, with that, thank you all for your work. Oh yes, not forgetting the raffle. You want to do that?
Let's have one of these gentlemen pull the raffle.
Yeah.
Here you go, Bob.
After Bob.
Bob.
One woman in there. And the winner is Nelson Gray from BWS Architects. Thank you everybody for coming out tonight and supporting us. Again, follow one of our social media platforms to see our next events and everything that's going on with the foundation. Everybody have a good evening.
All right.